Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, UAV Drone User Workgroup. My name is AASHTO and I will help facilitate today's webinar. Today's webinar is sponsored and planned by AASHTO and is hosted by the National Operations Center of Excellence, or NOCO. So a few words about the webinar host, NOCO. If you don't know already, at NOCO we offer a variety of resources to support the transportation system management and operations community. In today's webinar, you see a couple of different ways, links and files that you can download and browse to. So on the bottom left side, you see a useful links where there are a couple of ways that you can connect to us with, specifically on our YouTube channel. If you subscribe to that whenever a webinar recording is available, you'll be notified, and also on our newsletter that goes out bi-weekly. You would know about any upcoming webinars, events, or major TISMO announcements. On the right side of the useful links, you see the download slides, so you can directly download the PDFs of today's presentation from there now. This will be available now, and then at the end during Q&A when we are doing that. So let me cover a few logistics before we start today's webinar. For this webinar and all of our other webinars, we will be recording the webinars, and we will share that video along with the presentation slides through the on-demand learning section of the NOCO website. All the attendee phones are muted by default, but we would like you to stay engaged by using the question discussion pod that you see on the screen now. We have a question and answer session at the end of the webinar, so anytime during the webinar as the question comes to your mind, please type them in the question discussion pod. At the end of the webinar, we will read each of those questions out loud and will direct them at the presenters of the webinar. So that's all I had to cover with the logistics, and with that I'd like to hand it over to Shane to start us off with the webinar.
Great, thank you so much, and we do appreciate Nicole for hosting this webinar for us. Again, I'm Shane Gill, the Program Director for Multimodal Transportation here at AASHTO, and we're sponsoring this AASHTO UAV Drone User Workgroup webinar. And a little background, so AASHTO back in the spring of 2015 had our first roundtable discussion on the state DOT's use of UAVs and drones. And from that, an initial survey came out from our communications team that in March of 2016, and we held our first webinar based on state DOTs using UAVs and drones in April of 2016. Because of that conversation, the Standing Committee on Highways at the time and the Standing Committee on Aviation here at AASHTO did a survey and put together a proposal for NCHRP to look at the state successful uses of UAVs and drones. And then that prompted our communications team to carry forward the next survey for the states using UAVs and drones, and that was released in March of this year, 2018. And then from that, that survey showed at that time that 80% of the state DOTs were using or were researching the use of drones. And this kind of goes to the point of be careful with the information you put out or the statistics on surveys, because as soon as this survey went out, we had about 4 other states that were not listed on this group say that they were actually researching or using drones or were in the process, and they just had not filled out the survey. And so, so this number of 80% is certainly higher now. And from that, our board of directors in the spring of, in May actually of 2018, this spring, directed the Council on Aviation to be the lead to coordinate among the states UAV and drone use. And they asked specifically for us to reach out to the Committee on Maintenance, Council on Highways and Streets, Operations, Bridges and Structures, Environment and Sustainability, and the Transportation Communications team as well. That was just the initial group. We are certainly open to have members participate in the webinars and peer exchanges from other AASHTO committees. But this, of May, this was the direction our board gave us to make sure that the Council on Aviation was coordinating with these other committees. And so in the late summer, AASHTO held a joint meeting with the American Road and Transportation Builders and the Associated General Contractors. And one of the discussion topics was the use of state DOTs working with contractors, working with the construction companies, in using drones and UAVs. And there is going to be a series of white papers that come out based on this topic, and we're working with those two other associations as well. And then in September, at the AASHTO annual meeting, the Georgia DOT held a peer exchange session on the Georgia DOT use of UAVs, and that was really well attended. And following on that, the AASHTO ACEC committee held a roundtable topic. And so as you can tell, like in the short amount of time that we've been engaged in this issue, exponentially people and other associations as well as additional state DOTs are participating in this user group. And I say that because this is actually the first call that we've established for this topic, and we are definitely kind of looking forward to having additional webinars and other opportunities, peer exchanges for states to be able to share information. And I'll go into that a little bit later. But what I wanted to do is to focus on the agenda today, and that is we're going to talk about the domestic scan that was recently completed. Steve Cook and Troy LaRue, I'm hoping that Troy has been able to join, but Steve Cook, and I'm going to turn it over to him, but let me just let you know a little bit about Steve. He's the Engineer of Operations and Maintenance for the Michigan Department of Transportation with over 35 years of infrastructure engineering related experience, including design, construction, maintenance, operations, and ITS-connected vehicle research, development, and deployment. He directs and manages MDOT's system operations and maintenance field section, and he is the MDOT's project manager for UAS research, deployment, and provides technical assistance and statewide policy regarding the use of UAS. Steve is a member of both the AASHTO Committee on Transportation System Operations, AASHTO's Committee on Maintenance, and has served on several NCHRP projects throughout his career, including the domestic scan held earlier this year. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Steve to move into the domestic scan.
All right. Thank you, Shane. I appreciate that introduction. It's very nice. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on what part of the country you're in. Yeah, as Shane said, we have completed our scan. We're in the final stages of it now with the final report. Actually, there were several AASHTO committees that were kind of thinking about this back maybe 2 years ago. There were a couple of problem statements that coalesced together, and I think the AASHTO committee came up with the idea that, yes, scan would be the best solution to find out what's going on around the country and get this get started guidance document for everybody else that's trying to figure out what to do with these. So I'm going to talk about the themes of the findings that we came up with in the scan, the conclusions and recommendations. So I'll get right into it here. The objective of the scan basically was to look at the return on investment and benefits of UAS for surface transportation. It was to assist in the acceleration of national deployment of the technology by providing, and this is really what we're trying to get at the heart of this, the get started guidance document and these use cases for successful use of UAS. It was also to look at some of the things that are going on in terms of the deployment and possible research initiatives to further the technology and use of a UAS. So the scan itself, this was a scan conducted by, in part with NCHRP. It's part of the 20-68 scan, domestic scan program. The program was requested by AASHTO and funded by NCHRP. Our first meeting was last December to get the work plan in place, these amplifying questions that we needed to put out to the states that we selected for the scan that we're going to interview, and we provided and hosted that scan in San Diego last April for a week. So the scan team is made up of 8 state DOTs. You can see them there. It's Arkansas. Federal Highway was represented as well. Virginia, Florida, Wyoming, Alaska, Michigan, Vermont, and Utah. And of course, Shane Gill was our AASHTO representative. We had 2 subject matter experts as well that were part of the scan team. Kind of shows you the map of the various states that were involved in the scan. The green are the members. Those are the 8 states that were the members on the scan itself. The red are the 12 states that we selected, mostly because of our understanding of their use and maturity in the area. There were some states like Utah, Michigan, and Alaska that overlaid between a member of the team and a scan team that one of the states rather that we interviewed. General guidance, this is kind of the the guidelines that we followed as the scan team. Basically what we were trying to do when we gathered information was to look at how and why and where they're used. The folks are using this technology for various things like inspection, inventory, data collection purposes, surveying. There's a whole breadth of different use cases that are out there, and that's what we wanted to get our hands around a little bit. Data storage, uses, collection, analysis of data, how this is all done. We wanted to get our heads around that, which is a very difficult thing to do. It's one thing to collect data, it's another thing to use it for an application. We want to look at control methods, how these things were used either in automation or remote control, how people were using them in terms of line of sight, where they were using them, some of the sensing technologies of what was attached, the cameras, the infrared, LiDAR, how these were being used, how they're connected, and how the data was actually used on the platform or backhauled, how agencies were organized in terms of UAS. Where was that established? Where was the subject matter experts? The owners and operators, who was doing most of the work, if they were doing it at all? Was most of this being contracted out, or was it direct forces, or a combination of both? Benefits and costs were also part of the scan, and then any various obstacles, opportunities experienced in this deployment area is something else that we were looking for. So the findings of these general themes that we came up with, we shook all the information out at the end of Thursday. Friday we came together as a team, and this is what we came up with as a team after shaking all the information out. This is what filtered out of that. So the 7 themes that we came up with was and I'll go into each one of these, so I have a slide, one slide on each of these coming up next, so I'll just talk about these real quick. You need executive support, some sort of organizational structure internally, develop policies and regulations, safety and risk management, training and crew qualifications, public relations, and then application and operations, and I'll talk about those now. So,
hey, Steve, this is Troy LaRue. Did you want me to cover those slides?
Oh, yeah, you're on, Troy. Thank you. This was where Troy was supposed to chime in. So, Troy, you are on.
Hey, great. So, Troy, let me introduce you. This is Shane Gill again with AASHTO. Let me just introduce Troy, who is also a member of the domestic scan team. Troy is the statewide aviation division operations manager for the state of Alaska DOT and public facilities. He started his career in at the department, I guess, in 1997 as an equipment operator at the Dutch Harbor Airport. Mr. LaRue has worked as an equipment operator, airport manager, district superintendent before assuming his current position as division's operation manager. He supervises 3 aviation sections that manage the airport capital improvement program for 240 airports, airport property management, aviation policy, aviation system planning, and airport operations and security. LaRue has also been tasked with forming a UAS steering committee to establish operating standards for the department. He's a certified member of AAAE and has over 2 decades of airport experience. So I'll turn it over to Troy, who will kind of continue Steve's discussion on the domestic scan. And Troy, if you just ask for us to advance slides, we'll do that.
Sure. Thank you, Shane. So I'm looking at the slide with finding number 1, which is executive support conclusions. And
yes, sir.
What we determined very quickly is that if you don't have executive support, then really what you have is you have a fragmented program with people, trying to harness tools that they really need to have the resources and the proper tools to utilize. So we very quickly figured out that we could save resources, we could increase efficiency and improve safety. What we really also need to be able to do is to have a socialized program to where we can talk about how UAS really does save us a lot of our resources. And a lot of people think UAS is deployed just to look through windows and Big Brother's, looking from above, and that's really not it. So if you'll hit the next slide, finding 2. Successful programs have a centralized authority and a top-down support. And the reason for that is if you're not centralized, once again, you're fragmented and you can get very dysfunctional quickly. We found out very quickly also that we needed to leverage the aviation experts that were within our department. The surface transportation folks are extremely smart, but a lot of them aren't really well-versed in regulation. And so we needed to make sure that we had people who could speak FAA's language, be able to get the exemptions, the waivers, and exceptions that they needed. So finding number 3, next slide, policy and regulation conclusions. Successful programs, they have to align their policies and procedures and be consistent with both state and federal regulations. And it can get very complicated sometimes. Regulations aren't necessarily always easy. You have to be able to dig deep into FAA regulations to understand and to speak their language and to be able to communicate effectively with them. We also believe that we had to develop operations manuals. These things just don't come natural. These are aircraft, and they need to be treated as such. So next slide, findings 4, safety and risk management conclusions. So we figured out very quickly, Paul Wheeler from Utah was deploying a drone at one point in time, and the drone had to come up off of the ground and hover and do a 360 in order to calibrate. And about the time he had that drone hovering and calibrating, a gust of wind caught it. He had no control over the drone. He reached up his hand to keep the drone from hitting him in the head, and it sliced his finger open. So it became very evident that, things can go wrong very quickly out in the field, and we need to have emergency response plans, we need to have safety policies, and we need to have protective equipment when deploying. The other thing that we need to make sure, whether it is your department or if somebody else is flying commercially for your department, we need to make sure that those people have the proper insurance in place. So finding number 5, next slide, please. Training and crew qualifications are extremely important. You can go out right now and pass a 107 course, become a commercial drone pilot, and you can buy your drone off of Amazon, and you're all of a sudden a commercial operator. But really, we figured out that there are people that have a great aptitude on the sticks for flying, and there's people that just don't. And it's really important that you have some skills tests and some training that go along with your program. So finding number 6, public relations and conclusions. In the state of Alaska, when drones were first starting to be deployed, we had several legislators that were wanting to put together some pretty harmful language that would really hamper the effective use of drones in the state. We put together a committee and task force and started looking at, hey, do we really have enough privacy laws and whatnot? And we figured out very quickly that we did. We had to come up with a program to socialize that, to get people a little bit more relaxed. And then we also needed to put out several different radio spots and TV spots that were basically giving some guidance to different hobbyists and whatnot. What you don't want to do is you don't want a hobbyist to then get into the commercial world without following the rules and regulations that go along with it. And it's extremely important that we're able to socialize those things with the public. Finding number 7, application and operation conclusions. You know, you can start small, and that's what we really recommend. If you look at drone technology, it's doubling about every 6 months, and the drones that we're deploying today cost 10 times the amount that we're paying for them today 2 years ago. So it's really important to start small, get some good wins right off the get-go, and be able to communicate that to your executive team and your leadership to show them that you can get greater productivity, that we can reduce our impact on the environment, that we can deploy a safer methodology to complete our missions than what we've done in the past many different times. So final conclusions. It's really important to be able to learn from other departments. So if other departments are having a great, successful UAS program, peer exchanges, being able to leverage other people's successes for your own department is extremely important. Consider further validation of these applications. Look at the cost-benefit analysis, and that's really what is going to sell your executive team and help you develop your program. So our final schedule for moving forward, the final draft report will be submitted to NCRP for the final review September of 2018. So that's happened. The final report will be out January of 2019. And then we're going to continue to do all kinds of different dissemination activities, different conferences and webinars and whatnot. So with that, Shane, I'll get back to you.
Great. Hey, thanks, Troy. And so I do see some questions coming through on the chat box, and just to let folks know that we're going to go ahead and move to the next presenter, and then we will be doing a question and answer after Darshan gets finished, just so you know that we will be answering your questions, and Troy will be available because some of those are specifically related to Alaska. But so based on this domestic scan, it was quick to, I think, the members of the domestic scan and those participating that we realized that the state DOTs needed to have an opportunity to have peer exchanges and to have opportunities to discuss with one another, either webinar, conference calls, or in person activities that they were doing. Everything is moving so quickly in this industry, and I think that was one thing that we saw when we were doing this domestic scan. And so Darshan Divakaran, who is with the North Carolina DOT, he was participated in the domestic scan as well, and is going to give an update on kind of follow-up activities that he has helped us to coordinate. But let me give a little background on Darshan. He's an aviation expert with expertise in manned and unmanned flight operations, flight safety, remote sensing, geospatial analysis, and project management. He is a subject matter expert for the North Carolina Governor's Office, legislature, and public safety agencies. In this role as UAS program engineer, he co-leads efforts to work with DOT and other state agencies, local government, industry, universities, and community colleges to integrate a statewide UAS program in North Carolina. He leads flight operations safety for North Carolina UAS Integration Pilot Program, and he has conducted extensive research on UAS application and has educated agencies on its benefits. He is currently appointed in many national organizations and committees like AUVSI, ASTM, ANSI, NFPA, etc., that all are involved with creating UAS standards for commercial and public safety agencies. In addition, Darshan has also worked with several remote sensing platforms, photogrammetry, and GIS systems. He is also an FAA certified commercial pilot with multi-engine rating. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Darshan, who I also like to refer to as Dash. So hit it, Dash.
Thank you, Shane, and hello to everyone. Afternoon sessions are not the best, but I'll try to keep it interesting, and like Shane said, we'll answer the questions later on. So, you know, as DOTs and as Shane just mentioned, the technology is moving too fast, and there are a lot of us who are, I would say, up to speed with it, but then there are many other DOTs that are yet to catch up, and this is something which is important for all of us as DOTs and other agencies to, you know, work together and collaborate. So early on when I was talking to Commercial UAV Expo, so a little bit about Commercial UAV Expo, they organize 2 events in a year, and they do many more. They have 2 Commercial UAV Expos in a year, one in America and one in Europe. The next one's in Amsterdam. But they also organize LiDAR conference and some other conferences, a lot of which benefits DOTs. And most of their attendees, and many of the attendees are companies that build drones, build technologies, are you know, talking about their products and how they can help companies and agencies. But as such, DOTs are one of the biggest users of these technologies. So a lot of time, you know, these companies would like to get feedback from us on the products and also how they can help us out, but also service providers that are out there who would want to provide services to DOTs. So there's a lot of these questions that come up to us when we come for these conferences, but we can only answer at a point in North Carolina, but for other states, people have to meet these DOTs, and that was one of the reasons why we thought about early on when Commercial UAV reached out to me and said we have good 2 hours, 2.5 hour slot that we would want to assign something to DOTs. And I've been working with Shane to get together this team. So the whole, if those of you who attended this event would have seen, it had a great turnout, and the panel was the DOTs and infrastructure. So basically, this was an opportunity for us as users to come forward, talk about our programs, about our technologies that we use, and what else we are looking for in the future. So, so we had 2 panels. One was the DOT infrastructure integration panel, which was moderated by Shane, and the speakers were Troy, Bob, Adam, Glenn, myself, and Paul. So we represented majority of the DOTs that are doing this at a large scale, and the topics that we covered were setting up a UAV program, training, acquiring federal grants, the hurricane response and infrastructure inspections, the US IPP, how to work with other agencies, surveying, mapping, obtaining a buy-in and support, using GIS, you know, data management, BBLS operations, US for environment. There's a lot of topics that we covered in a very short time, and it gave an opportunity for the attendees to understand what a DOT program looks like and what our needs were. So before I go ahead to that side, so main thing out of that was as such for us to give more information to these attendees that we would require what sort of assistance, what sort of technology moving forward, and how these companies could reach out to individually to us or to other DOTs and provide their services. So that was a good opportunity for us to interact and answer a lot of questions they had. We also had another panel that was more a national and federal initiative, which was moderated by me, and we had Shane, Earl Lawrence, and Connie Yu from FHWA and FA. So we had FA and FHWA present there, and there was a great opportunity for people attending. So when I say the folks who are attending were also other DOTs that are still building their program or have just started, but also companies that are looking into collaborating with DOTs on some federal projects, and also we got a good opportunity to talk to these leaders and find out more about what funding opportunities were available for DOTs in the future. So the main key takeaways from this was that we got an opportunity to interact with the attendees, that is DOTs, AASHTO, and FHWA could talk to these attendees. We had roundtables after these sessions where we were able to answer one-on-one questions about our program, about how they could reach out to us with specific solutions to our problems. But we also got U.S. companies and service providers who initially had a lot of questions, but I think after that session they were able to understand that it's not that easy to work with DOTs. There are a lot of there's a lot of steps towards it, but it's not impossible. So this gave them a good understanding, and we also got an opportunity to talk to FAA about some of our initiatives and about what basically hear from FAA what some of the future initiatives are there that can benefit DOTs and other agencies. So moving forward also, we need to do more such events wherein more DOTs, not just the few DOTs that we just who are involved in these small events, but also the other DOTs who I have been talking to, who are just one-person program, and they need the help. So we want to see if we can bring them all together and discuss more with them how other DOTs can help them out and how FHWA and AASHTO can help them out. We also had opportunities to interact with companies whose products we use. We got more buy-in on the future technology that's coming and how it can benefit us. I just was in London 2 weeks back at a commercial UAV show, and we could see some of the agencies there that are similar to us, what they were doing, and it was pretty advanced in some ways. So moving forward, we'd like to see some opportunities to collaborate and see if we can have peer exchanges with other countries to find out what we are lacking or what they are lacking, and if we can help each other out. Moving forward, there in 2019 is the next event, the next Commercial UAV Expo. They have reached out back wanting to have a similar panel next year too. More in the line of within 1 year what many of the DOTs have changed, and they're wanting to see more new DOTs participating in this. So if any of you are on this call and are interested to be involved, can reach out to me. But this is an interesting, moving forward, there are many such events like this and AVSI and Interdrone. There are many other events that come up where DOTs can take an initiative to be on panels. And I'm working with some of these events to find out where we can push in, DOTs, AASHTO, and FHWA into these panels to have more one-on-one time with folks. So that's pretty much my information. If you need to reach out to me, and this presentation, all these presentations will be shared later on, so you can reach out to me by email or by phone. Shane, I'm handing out back to you.
Great, thanks, Darshan. And so for AASHTO and this drone user work group, kind of our next steps that we're looking at, and certainly I would love for people to begin to put into the question discussion pod some thoughts that you guys have, and we will get to the questions in just 1 second. But some of the things that we have coming up, and if you're on this webinar, you certainly will be getting invitations to future webinars. One includes we're looking to have the 3 state DOTs that are part of FAA's UAS Integration Pilot Program present on activities that they are doing and how other state DOTs can tag on to some of the research and deployments that these 3 state DOT pilot programs have set up. In addition, AASHTO Communications and Transportation TV will be doing, hopefully early in 2019, an additional survey and follow-up segment on states' use of UAVs and drones in emergency response, similar to what we've seen with Texas and Louisiana and Hurricane Harvey, and with North Carolina and Hurricane Florence, and Florida with Hurricane Michael recently, as well as in Georgia DOT, the use of that they used UAVs and drones when the I-85 bridge collapsed. And so with that, I'm going to kind of go through some of the questions that have been posed. And one of them was a question on, maybe Darshan or Troy could answer this, is how much of liability insurance should your state agency have? I'm guessing this is on if you yourself are going to be operating the UAV.
So this is Troy. You know, that's a great question. The state of Alaska is self-insured, and so we have a really, really lofty amount of insurance. When we're looking at commercial drone operators, what we're asking right now is for $2 million worth of liability for them to fly for us.
Okay. And then, Troy, well, the next question was actually for you. Has Alaska developed a skill test? I'm guessing that's for people who are piloting.
You know, what we're doing right now is we're using drone simulators, real flight, and it's really handy. You can figure out very quickly whether you have the aptitude or not.
I understand. And so another question was, I wish we had put up the slide. I know, Darshan, we were trying to keep slides as limited as possible, but just Steve or any of you guys from the domestic scan, can you give some examples of how state DOTs are currently using the drones? And maybe start with Steve, some examples that you saw during the domestic scan.
Yeah, so we saw like avalanche, we saw landslides, like Colorado was using it for that. You know, a lot of the actual use cases were primarily revolved around camera images or video. When you looked at infrared, like for bridge deck or concrete analysis or delamination or LiDAR, it really hasn't matured to the level where you can actually integrate the data into current business models. So that's kind of one of the outcomes that we got out of the scan is much of the information that's being used right now is camera imaging, high resolution photogrammetry, and those kind of applications where you overlay and stitch the pictures together on the back end of the 3D model. So there's a lot of work going ahead in terms of how the data will be used and integrated into DOTs and public sector business models.
Hey, Darshan, can you talk about some of your emergency response and also traffic incident management, et cetera?
Sure. So I can give you some of the examples that we DOTs are using for. So traffic management is a big thing. You know, monitoring the traffic. This is during routine operations, also like every day, making sure that you know after what hours are the traffic more intense, and to study the traffic patterns and all. But also during emergency response to plan evacuation routes and everything, we can use drones. But other than that, some of the projects that we have worked for is underwater vegetation mapping, bridge inspection, rail inspection. We also, most recently for Hurricane Florence, we used for infrastructure inspection. That is, we inspected dams and all other infrastructure during hurricane response. We also work with public safety agencies doing crash scene reconstruction. You know, crash scene reconstruction does, though some people think it's in the public safety side alone, but it also does fall into DOTs as we manage the roads. We worked, you know, when roads are shut for crash scene after a crash, it causes, you know, time and money for DOT and for the people, so it falls under DOT. So these are some of the other uses of DOTs, but I would say every other month or every other month we hear people, I mean, other DOTs using drones for more different purposes, so it's an ongoing thing.
Great. Thanks, Tarshawn. Any additional uses, Troy, that you guys in Alaska have been?
You know what we're working on right now is we're doing some 3D imaging of some of our mountain passes where we have huge avalanche issues, and we're hoping then during snow events to gather more 3D imaging, and we'll be able to know where to place our shots and how effective our shooting is. Another area that we're looking at right now is environmental controls. It's just so quick to be able to deploy a drone and to fly a silt fence, and you have proof of your inspection. Your inspection happens really quickly without trudging through the mud, and then if you do have a couple of issues, you can focus your attention on them really, really quickly. The other thing that I see Utah doing is all of their as-builts are going to 3D imaging, and it's really, really been a great cost-saving and effective use of drones. They have the agility to change plan sets extremely quickly.
So Shane,
Great, thanks. So Susan with Montana DOT, I think if you are looking and following the chat box or the question box, they do have a listserv and reference guide for us. We have linked that on, Susan and I had chatted before, we linked that on the Council on Aviation site. And we also, on the Council on Aviation site, state DOT or states and DOTs that have their own rules and regulations, we put links to those states, as well as other resources as well. And so then let's move on to the next question. And also for NCOE, we also will link to their webinar as well. Next question. Are the DOTs using camera video imagery for public involvement applications? And is there any crossover with virtual reality or augmented reality? Okay. Do we have anyone respond to that?
So Shane, this is Darshan. I think I'm not understanding the question really. Public involvement applications, like what? Are we using, DOTs are using it, that, so at the communication side, we do use it. Is that what the question is about?
I guess the question really was, are you using camera video imagery for the public involvement process? And I think that what we heard at several of these roundtables, or even with Georgia DOT at the AASHTO annual meeting, is that they found that they were having some conversations on roundabouts and communities, and some of the citizens having concerns with trucks being able to get through roundabouts or how it may slow down traffic. And so they actually flew drones and videoed several roundabouts, and then took that footage right to the public involvement meeting, showed it, and that helped to alleviate a lot of questions with basically having same day of footage that from people that were concerned with putting a roundabout into their community. And so I think the answer to that would be yes.
And absolutely, and I think we also, public involvement, a big thing would be during the Hurricane Florence. It played a big factor where we were able to give live videos of and live streaming of different areas which was impacted after hurricane, and give live feed to folks so that they avoid those roads and pass it on. So we have done that, and we do a rest of the stuff also where public involvement is there.
Great. And I think you see a couple of the additional questions. Other states are chiming in of ways that they have been using UAVs and drones, as well as additional states are showing their work with public involvement. And so what we'll be including those links onto onto our website. So now Jared is asking, apart from simply using the drones, are any other DOTs working to establish low-altitude airspace management system for urban air mobility?
Yes, we are at the beginning stage. So this is NCDOT is working at the beginning stage. So we have right now are in the process of forming the Beyond Surface Transportation group within DOT that is going to start planning for the infrastructure. But we are also interested in participating at the NASA's Urban Air Mobility initiative. So we are in that steps of at the early stages of working on it, and it's no surprise that like all infrastructure that's under DOT and transportation infrastructures and everything is under DOT, this also at some point is going to be DOT's responsibilities in the future, the urban air mobility part.
Great. So how are DOTs managing digital data storage component? Any issues with public privacy expectations?
So Shane, I can tell you on the state of Alaska front, storage is really a problem for us. Our IT folks are not happy with how much storage we really need. And from what I'm understanding, there's companies out there now that are putting together some pretty decent solutions for that. But I'm not an expert there.
Yeah, and any information we've got in MDOT from Michigan DOT in terms of data from a UAS or UAV has been usually stored and processed by a third-party vendor at this time.
So one of the next questions, which I think is being answered kind of below it, which is great, and all of this will be captured as well, is the question was, do any of the attending DOTs have or use COAs? And I saw that Basil with North Carolina said that they have a blanket COA. I don't know if you guys have something similar in Alaska.
Yeah, we've had a blanket COA for quite a long time now.
Yeah, Michigan just got one in the last 6 months.
Okay, great. So I guess the next question, has any of the DOTs actually used UAS for bridge inspection or tunnel inspection with the existing FAA rules? And I know the answer is yes. Minnesota, I don't know about these guys on the phone, but I know Minnesota has used UAS for bridge inspection, and I believe presented at the Bridges and Structures Conference this summer for AASHTO. But any other examples that that you know of, Darshan, for bridge inspections? And I think in our domestic scan, New Jersey DOT had used for bridge inspections, but any others?
So I think some of the answers are right there. Massachusetts DOT currently flies under Part 107, and Oregon is using for bridge inspection under existing rules. Arizona. So I think every DOT is somewhere or other. Even NCDOT is testing under Part 107, and also we are all practically all DOTs, I would say, that is having a UAS program or at least having a drone is doing bridge inspection at some level under Part 107.
Yeah, and we presented that. We presented that too, Shane, at SCAN. We have been doing quite a bit of that in some of the research that we're doing, looking at specifically at bridge deck delamination using infrared and overlaying that with sounding. So that has been one of our main use cases in terms of trying to, dig in deep into the element level of bridge inspection.
I really love this live action. People are asking questions and answering them before we get to them, which is awesome. And so I appreciate that. But I guess the next question was, has any DOT applied or used the COA to fly over live traffic? And I see that North Dakota wrote that they have completed flying 2 UAS for a large public event using operations over people, waiver, and a Class D airspace, and are currently working on linear infrastructure inspections in an urban environment.
Same thing for our NCDOT also, that we are working on getting it under a COA to do those flights, but we do traffic monitoring, not right over the live traffic, but this is what the thing is. Either you can do it right over it, or you can even be a position at a place and don't have to really be flying over the people. So I believe some DOTs are also doing live traffic monitoring, but not under a COA. But yes, moving forward, we are working on getting it on our core.
And I guess some people are asking specific questions regarding their state, their individual state, and I don't know if we have the answer to that. The question on DC, I mean, that would be, I guess, FHWA, FAA question. We can certainly look into through that. And for Virgil, it mentions, and I was going to ask some folks to explain this a little bit more, is that FHWA bridge inspection rules need to be rewritten because old language exists that an inspection is done within arm's length. And any response to that, Darshan or Troy?
Is that in the U.S. Side inspection rules or the general inspection rules?
I think he said it was under FHWA.
Yeah, so I think it's the general bridge inspection rules. I don't know if it's specific to unmanned systems rules.
Okay, and that's something we can certainly pass on to our Bridges and Structures Committee. We may want to look into that in addition.
Yeah, there's specific requirements in the MBI, an element level inspection where it has to be at arm's length. But I also know at the Subcommittee on Maintenance, the Bridge Technical Working Group this last summer in Charlotte had been in a discussion with the folks at Turner Fairbanks, and I believe there's research going on right now looking at UAS data and how that might impact this arm's length inspection when you've got a UAS that can go into difficult areas and do that inspection for you.
And I think that we do have two additional people commenting on Virgil's question. One with the fracture critical components require arm's length, otherwise UAS may be used. And I think that what we found on this domestic scan, and as we'll find kind of moving forward as we hear more states talking about how they are using this is really more for information sharing. But what we heard at the domestic scan is that using a drone or UAS is actually just a tool in the toolbox. And what happened in Georgia is that they looked at a bridge and thought that the inspector saw something, and so they then sent someone up to investigate, and it was actually a piece of duct tape and not a loose screw. And so it actually is helping to augment, not necessarily replace, a live person in some instances. And I think the answer, so Nilu could help me out on this, I believe all of these questions and all of this information is going to be available to be shared, and there is a recording of the webinar that we will be posting as well.
That is correct.
Right. And again, we're not on the question of bridge inspections. We have a Bridges and Structures Committee that are definitely in-depth and know all the rules and regulations that go into this. What we're trying to do with these webinars is to show how other state DOTs are using this technology. And again, it's just a tool in the toolbox. We're not promoting that someone go out and purchase a drone or use it in these ways. We're just sharing information of how others are using this technology.
And I think Shane Taylor has a question, are states getting survey-grade data to replace traditional survey for roadway project design? I think that's the next question.
Do you guys know the answer to that?
So I would say not in the North Carolina perspective, not replacing, but basically we are at that time of testing and I would say complementing it because we are at this point still the photogrammetry and other units are working to see if UAS is the only solution, and we did inspection tool project about a year back, wherein we realized that you're not going to be able to replace everything traditional survey methods. So I would say that it's our best answer would be that it's complementing it right now, but I don't know about other DOTs if they have replaced it at the moment.
Now, I'd have to agree with that. I know at the scan that Caltrain seemed to be looking at that. They were actually doing overlays with their design, current methods of design data collection with the UAS to see how that lined up, but I don't know if anybody else had anything beyond that at this time, especially to replace. A lot of it's just being analyzed now.
So I see that people are asking, okay, this was a question that was discussed at length in the domestic scan, and I think it's one that is important, is the question of what drone types or models are state DOTs using, and I think you're going to find a wide variety of this, and I think that's a good kind of conversation to have on its own, to have a whole webinar about the different uses, the different models that are being utilized. But Troy, can you give a couple of examples of what you guys are using in Alaska?
So DJI Phantom 4s are probably the most popular drone that we're using, and they don't even need to be the top of the line. We're really doing just mainly photo imaging, so you don't need a real expensive platform for that. If you're going to get into LiDAR or whatnot, then you might need a little bit more expensive drone. The other thing that you need to consider is what's your mission. You know, will a slow quadcopter do it for you, or do you need a fixed wing that has a whole lot more legs to it? So for starting out easy, I think the DJIs are really good.
And I agree with Troy in that it's basically, if this question does help the new DOTs or new agencies that are looking into getting drones, I would say look at a basic level of making sure you're able to get your maximum projects completed at the lowest cost possible. You don't want to go ahead and buy certain things that are in the expensive range, because you may have a short-term plan for it. So practically at a standard-wise, most of the DOTs are using DJI. But if you're looking at a fixed wing, it would be SenseFly platforms. And then there are many other platforms out there like Unique and all, which there will be certain people who will vouch for that. So it's more at a level of, if you want to keep the cost low, it is DJIs and Uniques. Great.
So a question was, panel members, on your thoughts of using tethered drones.
Well, that's an interesting, and tethered drones do have a great benefit moving forward. Like those who are interested in traffic monitoring, that would be a great system to have, because you could have it positioned in different locations and have hours of footage coming in. So tethered systems do have a great future in DOTs. But it depends on what sort of projects. It could be used for, monitoring even after hurricane, or after natural disaster, keeping a watch on the changes and everything. But and even in the airport side, inspection sites and all, it can have a great benefit. So there is a lot of benefit in it, and it's basically depending on what sort of system you have.
Okay, and then Linda, on your question, which I think is a very good one, this information sharing, which is I think what we found out at the domestic scan, is so valuable for our members to have and have opportunities to ask each other questions. And so we are interested in continuing to have these discussions. We'll look into the option of something similar to like a Google group to have these discussions, but also like any questions that you have, feel free to shoot me a question. We'll share them with the other folks on this and can get responses until we can get something that's more like where you guys can do it back and forth for the time being. But we also are going to answer a couple of more questions, and then as I said, we'll kind of just do a little wrap up.
So I think the next question is, do the DOTs have maintenance agreements with DJI for software or hardware needs? I would say not a maintenance agreement as such, but a couple of DOTs, even our DOTs, have been communicating with DJI on on specific needs when it comes to, for example, during Hurricane Florence, DJI helped out by unlocking our platforms and helping us out with our needs. So I would say no maintenance agreements as such, but that is something you have to have with third-party vendors at the moment. Is you may have to, when you buy your drone. So this is one thing, when you're purchasing your drone, there are a lot of options out there. As such, we prefer, in our DOT prefers is knowing the person from where we are buying, so that if we have any maintenance thing, we can, send it directly to them. So a lot of times the online deals do work out good, but then you have to find a third-party vendor to have a maintenance agreement with.
And I guess the next question, and this is one that came up during the domestic scan, do DOTs prefer to own the UAV UAS or to contract out to people to perform the function? And I think that you're going to have I'll let the states respond, but what I think we heard in the domestic scan, fairly similar. Do you, as a state DOT, own your own pavers or backhoes, or do you have your contractors own the paver and backhoe? I think it's a tool in the toolbox, and how you decide to use it is going to be up to your DOT. But I'll let the others that participated in the conversations.
So Shane, this is Troy, and in the state of Alaska, I can tell you that there are a lot of applications that we believe we have the talent and the expertise to go fly the missions, but there are many that we don't believe we do. And one example is we did a LiDAR aeronautical survey of 2 different airports this summer, and it was much easier and faster for us to go ahead and contract that out, and the person who flew it just did an incredible job. And so when it really gets into very technical areas or very expensive equipment, we go ahead and hire the experts.
And
I would echo that in Michigan too, but we also have folks at aeronautics that can go out at a moment's notice. The other nice thing about it, they can go out on a moment's notice, and they can also do some of the low-hanging fruit things that we need to get done, and also some quality assurance, just checks and balances. Sometimes if a contractor goes out, that would be that overlay if you need the future. So there's some areas where you like to have that institutional knowledge, but primarily, like Troy said, some of the big jobs and the heavy lifting, contracting primarily for us.
And just to highlight on North Carolina side, we initially, our program started out with contracting, and then later on we did an internal. But we are again, we have both internal and contracting. So most recently, when we did the emergency response to Hurricane Florence, it was both a coordination of internal and contracting team that worked together. So it depends on, as you build a program, what funding you have, what's your future plan. And for us, we initially preferred contracting, and then we realized that we need an internal program. So it's again, it comes to a point that as you're starting out, you will need help, and a lot of times contracting initially does help out.
Great, and I would also encourage folks to go to the Council on Aviation website under the under drones, and Paul Wheeler with Utah DOT has also talked about, as well as Glenn Stott with New Jersey DOT, about their use of federal funds to actually purchase equipment, and so you may find that interesting of what sources of funding are available out there to purchase UAVs. And then a question on, do you use handheld anemometers?
Initially, I think everyone who started out did use it because that is the easy way of and the cheapest way. But now there are other solutions, and I would say if you go to the hunting shops, you get a lot of weather, portable weather systems. You can use that. But at the same time, we have been talking to a couple of companies that are taking interest in weather. So there are companies out there that are integrating it with the systems that you're going to be using in the future. So weather is going to play a critical part. So I would say, handheld anemometers is the best way to start out. But in the long run, you're not going to get at different altitudes. You're not going to be able to judge the winds with an anemometer. So it's how we all started out.
Great. So I want to thank everyone, especially NCOE, for hosting this webinar, which I said is the first one that we've done kind of as the outreach of the UAS drone user work group, and we will be having additional ones hopefully about every 2 to 3 months on various topics, including the UAS integration pilot program sites that are, I think the FAA selected 10 sites, 3 of those for state DOTs, maybe it was 12. And so we're going to be working with those 3 state DOTs to host a webinar in the near future, as well as we are working on what we would like to do is a in-person peer exchange so that we would have a day of meetings and conversation, around, like kind of a roundtable discussion where these types of questions can be asked, and people in attendance from all the various kind of councils and committees that are interested in this topic would be able to participate and listen into. And then we'd also, what we're also trying to do is to do like at least a half day of in the field actual use of UAS, and so some live demonstrations of uses, and then kind of almost and then go back to the classroom and like download and discuss what we just did type of activity. So be on the lookout for that opportunity. And with that, again, all of this information will be posted hopefully in the next week or so, and will be on the Council on Aviation's website as well as NCOE's website, and I will be sharing it with the other AASHTO liaisons for the drone user work group. So if you're a member of the bridges or the operations or the maintenance, my counterpart here at AASHTO will have that information, or this information, that they can post on their websites as well. And so thank you to our presenters, Steve, Troy, and Darshan, and look forward to the next one. And if anybody has any questions, again, this is Shane Gill, sgill@ashto.org, and look forward to working with you and participating in future webinars. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.